Just by way of background, I am a lawyer practicing family law. I'm a Law Society accredited family law mediator, and I also work as a parenting coordinator in Mount Coquitlam. And I'm here today to talk a bit about what mediation is, what it isn't, and how it can become very creative within the family law context. So I want to start by giving a little bit of background about mediation, because I find a lot of people, when they come into my office, don't know what mediation is, because it's a pretty new thing. And under the new Family Law Act, which came out in 2013, the government decided to encourage a lot more mediation, because they felt it's better than having people plugging up the court system. So mediation is a process where you use a neutral third party to try to resolve family issues. So the person is neutral. If they're a lawyer, they're not allowed to give legal advice to anybody. Their role is to sort of sit in the middle and to help these two people to work things out. The process is without prejudice. So what that means is that what is discussed in mediation stays in mediation. So for example, if you're in family mediation and one of you, you're trying to craft a deal, and one of you says, okay, I'll let you have the car. Maybe if everything falls apart and you end up in court, you don't want to let the other person have the car. You might want to change your position. So what was discussed in mediation doesn't get used against you later in court. It stays there. And so that really encourages a lot of creativity. And then the other thing that ties in with mediation that a lot of people don't realize is it's also confidential. So it means you don't get to discuss it over the fence with your neighbors. You can discuss it with your lawyer. You might need to discuss it with your accountant, depending on what you're dealing with. But it all stays within that process. So that allows a lot more creativity in mediation, and it also means it stays very private, which is something that a lot of people like. The thing that I really like about mediation, especially when there's kids, is that it gives people a chance to work together to work things out. Instead of fighting at each other, court, I think, can be very destructive, because what happens is you've got the lawyers, you've got the parties, and they're battling each other. And sometimes I think, because I've had this happen, and maybe I've participated in it, I think that lawyers forget that when they close their files, that these two people still have to get along together. They have to see their kids at graduation, and they're going to still be in contact. I think sometimes the lawyers forget that they can do a lot of damage. And I think that's sort of the court process that does that damage, and the government's recognized that. So mediation is kind of a new wave. It is a way that lets couples choose their own destiny and plan their own life. And it also allows them, what I always say, allows them to think outside the box in what that solution is going to look like. The benefits is quicker than court. It's quicker than negotiating between lawyers, because I've been one of those too. Your client gives you instructions, you draft a letter, you let them review it, you send it off to the other side, and that lawyer sends it to their client for instructions, gets back, somebody asks for something, it can go on and on. So mediation is a lot quicker because the party's right there in the room. And it's creative, and again, it allows people to craft something that works for them. Now, I'm a lawyer, and I don't bash lawyers. We serve a purpose, but sometimes with lawyers, we can be a little more restrictive in our thinking. And part of that is because some lawyers, well, this is the way we've always done it, so let's try doing it this way. Or because we have to give our clients the worst case scenario. We have to warn them. You know, if you do this, you know that this could happen. And that can sometimes be restrictive. And the other thing is that lawyers, we know our clients, but we don't know what the other person's like. And that can sometimes impact the advice that we're getting. So I've learned, as I've been practicing longer and longer, because I've been doing this for over 20 years, practicing law, that my client knows their spouse better than I do, and sometimes they will say, no, no, no. You know, he or she's not going to do that, I trust them. Sometimes you can trust them, most of the time they're right. Sometimes you can't always be sure. But a lot of times they do know their partner very well. Judges have a really tough position, because if you end up going through the court system, you've got a judge who doesn't know the family, doesn't know all the dynamics. They have very limited time. It might be a 5-day trial to learn everything about a family that's been together for 15 years, say, and then they have to make decisions. It's a very hard spot to be in. And they can also get people who keep coming back and back to court as well, where maybe it's better if it's resolved outside And sometimes what happens with the judges is because they have limited information, sometimes they don't get all the information. They might make a decision that might be very, very hard for the couple to implement. I think that couples, they know their situation better, they know their kids better. They know more about what they're willing to do. And some people can work very, very well together in trying to figure out how they're going to deal with their property and their kids. But I also wanted to say what mediation is not, which is important. Mediation is not a judge telling anybody what to do. There is something new called Mediator, where, I won't go too much into that, but where the professional acts as a mediator first and then can go into arbitration or write a decision. Regular mediator cannot do that. They cannot make a party do something. I had somebody who sent me an email and said, I want you to do mediation and I want you to make my ex do this, this, and this. I can't do that. I need to go someplace else. So another thing that a lawyer mediator is not all mediators are lawyers. Some of us are. We're the family law mediators are the lawyers. We cannot be the lawyer for either side. We cannot give either side legal advice. We cannot witness the agreement at the end of the day, because if we do, we're saying we've given you legal advice. We're not allowed to do that either. And we cannot be the combined lawyer for both. I've had people who come in and think, I'm a lawyer for both, we're just going to be really efficient here. No, we have to be very careful about that. If we give legal advice to somebody, say before mediation, we're disqualified. We're not supposed to be acting as the mediator after that. So I'm very careful. What I do is I tell people I will give them legal information when we are together at the same time, and I give it in neutral language. That's the most that I'll do. And I do strongly urge clients to get what's called independent legal advice. So some people will go and get a consultation with a lawyer before they come into mediation. A lot of lawyers will have our consultation. They'll charge something for it. We'll have to find out what they're charged, but they can get legal advice before. Or other times I'll go along, and if I think somebody needs legal advice, I will actually shut it down and say go out, because I don't want to waste people's time. And if I have somebody looking at me like a deer in the headlights going, should I do this? No, because if I say, no, you shouldn't do this, then it's not fair to the other side. So I can't do that. But at the minimum, people should get legal advice at the end before they sign any agreement. Because it's a contract, there are consequences. People need to understand what they're getting, what they're giving up. They need to be sure that the agreement is fair to them. And that's why I always make sure that my mediation clients know it is not a done deal until it's signed, until you've had a chance to review it with the lawyer, because things may shift once you've had some legal advice. So I try to give some guidance so that there's not huge changes, but it's not a done deal until you've had that advice, and I really push people to get it, because I'm not their lawyer. Different ways to find a mediator. First thing on my list, family justice counselors. Yes. They are available at provincial courthouses. They are free, and they can cover issues of parenting plans, what we used to call custody, but parenting plans, child support, spousal support.
I'll learn more about this.
Yeah.
This is actually
okay.
useful for me, actually.
Yeah, so that's what they can cover. What they cannot cover are issues like family property and debt, because that's not within provincial court jurisdiction.
Right.
But what they can do is draft an agreement for the parties and help them reach an agreement on those issues, like where the kids are going to live, what that plan is going to look like, what child support is going to look like. They can deal with all of that, write up an agreement. People still are recommended to get legal advice before they sign it, and then it gets filed in the courthouse. And then it can be enforced, I believe it can be enforced by the court. Mediate BC family roster, go online, and there's a lot of mediators there. Google. You can ask friends or family, because somebody else might have used a mediator, or if you have a lawyer might know somebody. I will cover the difference between a mediator and a family law mediator. There are there's different training for mediators and family law mediators. So I am a family law mediator, it means I'm a lawyer. The Law Society has required that I take a certain number of courses, and I have to maintain a number of courses every year to keep that accreditation. Because I'm a lawyer mediator, it means at the end of the day, I can draft a separation agreement. Also in mediation, I can do divorce too, which is something I learned to me. There are mediators who are not lawyers, so they have gone through a lot of training. There's different places they can get training, they have certificates. There are some counselors who work as mediators, and there's other people who do mediation as well. So they can do mediation, they just don't have that same legal background that a lawyer mediator has, and they're not supposed to be drafting separation agreements, full agreements at the end of the day. So what issues can be covered in mediation and family mediation? Now here's where I'm stepping outside what the family justice counselors do. So the mediators outside of what the family justice counselors do can cover. So kids, so working on a schedule for the kids, where they live, what that's going to look like, almost anything to deal with kids we cover. Child support, special expenses, spousal support, so those things are what the family justice counselors do. We can also cover division of property, which, and many people don't know this, property includes pension plans, RRSPs, and things like that. The house, what are you going to do with the house? If one person's going to buy out the house, what's that going to look like? How are you going to structure that? So they can help you with that as well. There's businesses, recreational property. Sometimes people have a cabin and they need to figure out what they want to do with the cabin. Pets. I have done mediation about pets because that can actually be a big issue. If you have an elderly dog and one person's going to keep that dog, it may have a lot of high medical expenses. And you want to talk about what's going to happen there. And sometimes one person might say, well, I want to be able to see the dog on the weekends. I've done that. Almost any other issue. And the other thing that can come up in mediation as well is emotional issues. So a lot of times there are issues that come up around the separation. And mediation is a place where sometimes those things come up, sometimes you are addressing them, because you sometimes have to look at them and deal with them so you can move on to the next thing. I have found that as a lawyer mediator, I get clients who are actually quite impatient to move on, or say anxious to move on to the resolution, so I don't spend a lot of time on that unless it's kind of essential, because they just want to move on and get it done, which is fine with me. I do screening before mediation, which is something we should be doing. Screening is not scary. Screening is really a chance for me to learn a little bit more about where each person is coming from. So it gives me a better sense of their concerns, what they want to achieve, and then there are other things that I have to ask. I have to check for violence screening. If it's a situation where there's been a lot of physical abuse, it's not going to be suitable for mediation because there's going to be a huge power imbalance. We have to check for things like alcohol issues and drug abuse issues. If there's somebody who, say, has a very serious drug addiction, they may not be able to comprehend what's going on in the room. And so that's not a fairly balanced situation. Mental health issues, if there's mental health issues that are not under control, you might not be able to do mediation there as well. So it really depends. So that screening also involves finding out a bit more about the circumstances if there is an issue like that and if that's suitable. And then the other thing that I cover there is financial disclosure. I will give people a list and tell them what I want, because we have to look at a lot of things like income, family property. We need to know what's there so that we can cover everything and not leave it out. So I like to cover that because if we reach an agreement at the end of the day and have that agreement written up and we've left things out, there's a real risk that that agreement can be set aside later. So I like to always make sure that we've covered everything. So the thinking outside the box part comes in mediation. I like to use big flip chart, colored markers, and you can use it for all kinds of things. Parenting plans, schedules with kids is one place where I think the mediation process is great for allowing people a chance to really experiment and play around a lot. Some people think that parenting plans for kids, if you're doing a 50-50, it's going to be 1 week on, 1 week off. It is not. You can do 2 days, and then the weekend that rolls around. You can play around with different things. So you might have a kid who's doing hockey, where one parent goes, yeah, I don't mind taking the kid to hockey practice these mornings, and that involves a lot of creativity. So with mediation, both parties are involved, and they're both there to give their input, and that's what makes it so nice. So you've got one person going, well, I kind of like to do it this way, and the other parent might go, well, what about X and Y? So you can play around with it with both people having input until you come up with something where they both kind of go, yeah, this will work. And so I find that that's a lot, it's fun for me doing it. I think it gives them a lot of control. It means that they can come up with something that's not what the lawyers would come up with. So lawyers might do it this way, and not what judges would come up with, because it's something that's a bit outside the box, and particularly if you have parents who have to travel for work, because that can be a bit of a challenge as well. I've had a couple where we have somebody who's had to do business trips, and that shifts everything, because if they're trying to do a 50-50 and one parent's gone for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, what is that going to look like when they come back? How are you going to structure it? Do you change things on child support because one person's away for a couple of weeks? So both parents are there to have input. Both of them are there to be really actively involved in what it's going to look like. And it means that what you can come up with is something that's really creative, very different, but something that they can both live with and that the kids can live with. So the plan can look however the parents want it to look like. And what I don't know if they always realize is while they're each sitting there on opposite sides tossing out ideas for this, they're actually working together to come up with this solution, and they look at it in the end and it's something they put together. I don't tell them what to do. We just look at different things, or I might say, we thought about this and we thought about that. So the plan can be very creative. It makes it very interesting to draft the agreements, because they tend to be quite challenging, because it's not your usual standard 1 week on, 1 week off. You can do all kinds of things about Christmas. You've got spring break out, where I practice with 2-week spring break, which means sometimes a little more creativity and working things out. And summer vacations. So people have a chance when they're both involved together to come up with something that's off the beaten track, which is something I really like, because I think it puts them in control, and also because they know their kids better than anybody else, and they have more input that way. Other things that they can address in mediation when they're dealing with kids are things like babysitting. You can put in a right of first refusal on babysitting, which means if I have the kids have time and I need a babysitter Friday night, I'm going to call the other parent and give them a chance to babysit. You can set out all of those things. You can have as much or as little detail as you want about travel with kids, because that can be a very big one. You can get into issues over passports and getting consent to travel, and what do we want to do? How much notice do we want to have to give the other parent if we want to travel with the children? You can talk about that. You can cover that in your agreement. You can cover, like I said, almost anything. If you have children with health issues, you can set out how you're going to deal with those health issues. Some people might want to have a diary or an agenda that's going back and forth, or you might want to set out communication issues. I've had some where the parties have actually worked out communication rules, which we've attached to the agreement, so that they can follow it. If there's an emergency, we're going to text, we're going to call, here's how we're doing this, that's what this is going to look like. So with mediation, you can sometimes just start a chart. Okay, what do you want? And one of them might say, I really need to have this kind of communication from the parent. Okay, that was on the chart. Are you okay with that? Yeah. And you move on to the next one. And so you can come up with a list of what works for them and what they both need, where they're both having input, which is sort of a very nice thing to have. You can deal with school stuff. You can deal with activities. I've had some where they've tried to coordinate, well, you're always the one who takes the kids to karate, so let's put it in there. You're going to be the one who takes them, and here's how we're going to coordinate who's driving. It can be as creative as the parents need to be, and you can work around the kids' lives. So that's what I really like about mediation. I think it's really awesome for them, because you can hit on issues or that may not be addressed if you're in court because you may think, oh, it's a really small thing. But it's actually a really big thing, and how that family is going to move into a shared parenting type of situation, because that's totally different than when you're living in the same house and you just say to parent, hey, are you okay to go into the driving today? So it's wonderful because they have input. It puts them in control of their lives. And meanwhile, what these two parents are doing who are going through separation is they're building teamwork. Because they're working as a team to create this chart. And they may not always realize that that's actually what they're doing. It's really fun to watch. Communication is a big issue in mediation. That's why I like to do the pre-mediation sessions, because I like to hear a bit more about where people are coming from. And what I always do is I tell people that it's confidential. I don't repeat what they tell me in those sessions, but I use it for good. And how I do that is, by the time most couples, their relationship is broken down, they've been together for a while. Let's say they've been together 10 years or 15 years. And in time, their communication has hit a certain pattern. So that one person will say, okay, when they say A, they actually mean Z. Because all the time we've had fights, whenever they said A, they actually meant this. But maybe when that person is saying A, they actually mean A. But the other person's still hearing Z, so they're not hearing what the other person's saying. Or people become very suspicious about what the other person means when they say something. So when I've had the chance to meet with them separately, I have a better sense of where they're coming from. And part of my job as a mediator, I think, is to kind of almost be an interpreter and put a spin on it. And so when I hear a person saying A, so I know this person over here might be hearing Z, I get to take this and spin it around in a different way, so then this other person can hear it in a different way. And when I do it successfully, it's wonderful because you see the lights go on, and all of a sudden, oh, everything shifts in the room. It's quite wonderful. People can let down their defenses. You can start moving on, and it's quite a huge thing when people start to hear the other person in a different way and realize they don't have to be suspicious, they don't have to have their back up. And maybe they both want the same thing, they just didn't realize it because communication had broken down over all those years. So I find it helps a lot. When we hit the point where we have that shift again, that's where you move outside the box. Because people then can think a little more creatively because they're not busy being defensive. So that's really nice when that happens. On financial end of things, with mediation, we also have a lot of scope for creativity there in a lot of different ways. Because people have preconceived notions about what things must look like. And the framework, although there's a legal framework, as I know, how things can look, there's still some room for creativity. When I have clients who have kids, I always tell them we need to deal with child support, because I know if they want to file for divorce, their agreement is going to be given to the judge, because the judge has to look at it to make sure that there's adequate arrangements in place for child support. And I don't want them, divorces getting bounced because we didn't cover child support mediation, so I make sure that we cover it. But with child support as well, there's still some room for creativity depending on the circumstances of the couple. So that's something that we can address in mediation as well. Both parties can have some input, and sometimes one person, for example, in a shared parenting situation, one person might have a really big housing expense, and the other one might not. So the one who doesn't have that housing expense might be willing to say, okay, let's jiggle things around a little bit, because I know you need more money in your pocket to pay for housing, and I'm okay with that. I want the kids to stay in that house. So sometimes we get creativity that way, where parties are playing around with things a bit. And as long as it's something that's within the realms of what I think a judge will be satisfied with, and as long as the lawyers are satisfied with it, and the parties can live with it, good to go, and hopefully the judge will accept it as well. But if it's reasonable, I mean, I do try to provide some guidance to people so they're not going way off the beaten path, because I'm a lawyer too, and I don't want their lawyers going, what is she doing? So I try to give some guidance, but there is some room for creativity there, and because both parties are there that have the input, you can come up with something right there that's outside of that, as I say, outside the box or off the beaten track. There's some creativity that can surround spousal support, because there's different kinds of payment for support. There's monthly support, and then there's also what we call lump sum support. And lump sum support is where somebody pays it sort of in advance in a big chunk. And there's no tax that attaches to that one. Monthly support, there's tax. So you can play around with that as well in mediation, because sometimes maybe you've got a lot of money coming out of the house sale, and somebody would like to pay something in a lump. Both parties are there to be involved and to have input in what they want in their financial situation. Yeah, I might rather have money up front. And so one of I'm forgetting, I'm rambling on and sounding like a lawyer. I just slow down a little bit. So with lump sum support, that means somebody has more money in their pocket up front.
Oh, okay.
So some people might like to have that instead of monthly payments. And sometimes one person, the payor, might say, yeah, I don't want to do the monthly payments because I want to have more money in my pocket to pay for this. I'd rather give you a chunk right now. So you can play around with that in mediation. You can sit down, you can get out a calculator, and you can figure things out. We have other tools that we use as well. You can sit down and figure out what that's going to look like. So you have a lot of input that way too. The goal is to reach some kind of agreement. So if the parties reach an agreement, what does that look like? The non-lawyer mediators can prepare a memorandum of understanding, which parties can then go and review with a lawyer. It should be put into some kind of formal separation agreement. There are some do-it-yourself kits and stuff out there. You can do that. If people choose to do that, they should have a lawyer review it with them before they sign it. Or if you have a lawyer mediator doing it, they can draft that agreement, and then you go and have it reviewed with a lawyer before you sign it as well. Why you need to have a formal written agreement, I get really off into legalese stuff, but there's a couple of reasons why. One is if a couple wants to file for divorce. You need to have proof, a document that confirms you've got arrangements in place for child support and parenting arrangements, so that the judge will sign their divorce order. It will prevent issues down the road. For some things, like if you're dividing pension plans or RRSPs, you need to have it in writing in an agreement. Or if somebody's buying out the house, so if one of the parties is going to buy the house from the other party, the bank sometimes wants to see a signed agreement before they will advance money for a mortgage. So they really want to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row and it's in an agreement. So some people will do the do-it-yourself agreements. I've seen some that were fine and some that were not. But you always should review it with a lawyer before you sign it, because it's harder to change it later and more expensive to fix it later in court than to spend a little bit of time and have a lawyer review it now before you sign it. So I probably ran through all that really fast. Why I like mediation, and I recommend it whenever I can, is because I think it is a much nicer way for people to work things out. It gives them the opportunity to come out of it with a much friendlier relationship than if they go through that court process. Sometimes you have to go through court, sometimes you have no choice because one party is being very unreasonable or unrealistic, or the situation is just such where you must go through the court system. But I think that if you can use a more friendly approach, I think that's better for people in the long run, especially when there's kids. It's more creative, it's faster, and I think that people are happier with mediation than with the other options. I think that when they get it done at the end of the day, like I said as a lawyer, if I've done mediation for them and they have a signed agreement in place, it's the only time that lawyers are allowed to do divorces jointly. And I have had mediation clients who want to do it, and they like that emotional feel of doing the divorce together, instead of one person filing for divorce against the other. And I think for people it helps them feel that they're doing it together, nobody's blaming anybody, have the opportunity to do it. It does depend on both parties being willing to go. Probably sometimes you get one side that's willing to go and the other one. That's where you may end up having to go through other options. But if both parties are willing to be there, I think that it's a much nicer way to get things tied up. So, talk to best.
Wonderful. I want to thank you so much, Katherine, for coming in. So.